Welcome to MarkGuy, where we explore self-improvement, motivation, habits, mindset. In today's episode, we're discussing that's why you should never get involved with a radical feminist. You know what no one tells you? The most dangerous ideology in your personal life isn't the one that openly opposes you. It's the one that promises equality while systematically dismantling your sense of self. You think you're entering a relationship. What you're actually entering is a re-education camp where your masculinity is the disease and her ideology is the cure. Picture this. You meet her at a bookstore, a coffee shop, maybe through mutual friends who describe her as passionate and intelligent. She's articulate, driven, speaks with conviction about justice and fairness. The energy is magnetic. You're drawn to her strength, her opinions, her refusal to be another passive presence in your life. The conversations are electric, challenging, stimulating, unlike anything you've experienced. You tell yourself this is what mature love looks like. Two equals, building something revolutionary together. But 3 months in, you're apologizing for how you sit. 6 months in, you're explaining why your career success isn't oppression. A year in, you're in therapy not to heal, but to unlearn your toxic patterns that, curiously, only she seems to see. Let me paint you the psychological landscape of what's actually happening here. This isn't about feminism, the noble pursuit of equal rights and opportunities. This is about radical ideology meeting intimate relationships. And when any extremist worldview enters your bedroom, your brain becomes the battlefield. The mechanism starts with something psychologists call ideological possession. When a belief system becomes so central to someone's identity that every interaction gets filtered through its lens. In radical feminist ideology, the lens is power dynamics. And guess what? In that lens, you're always the oppressor. Your height, physical intimidation. Your voice, verbal dominance. Your salary, economic manipulation. Even your attempts at kindness get reframed as benevolent sexism or love bombing. Can you see the trap forming? Every natural masculine trait becomes evidence of the patriarchy living through you. Here's where it gets darker. The human brain has a reward system built on intermittent reinforcement, the same mechanism that keeps people pulling slot machine levers. In this dynamic, affection becomes conditional on your ideological compliance. Today you use the wrong pronoun for someone you've never met, no intimacy. Tomorrow you attend her rally. You're rewarded with the warmth you once took for granted. But here's the insidious part. The goalposts never stop moving. What was acceptable yesterday becomes problematic today. You're not in a relationship. You're in a perpetual struggle session where confession never brings absolution. Phase 1 is the honeymoon of intellectual stimulation. You're learning, growing, examining your privilege. It feels like enlightenment. Phase 2 is the erosion, where every joke you make gets dissected, every friend you have gets problematized, every memory of your past gets recontextualized as toxic. Phase 3, that's the isolation. You've cut off the friends she deemed toxic. You've distanced from family members who don't get it. Your support system has been replaced by her ideology, and now you're too deep to see the cage you've helped build around yourself. The concept at play here is called cognitive dissonance, and it's eating you alive from the inside. Your brain knows something is wrong. You feel it in that knot in your stomach when you're about to speak freely. Then catch yourself. You feel it in the exhaustion of monitoring every word, every gesture, every thought for potential offense. But here's the trap. You've invested so much emotionally, socially, mentally, that admitting the problem means admitting you've been complicit in your own psychological destruction. So what does your brain do? It doubles down. It tells you this discomfort is just your privilege being checked, your toxicity being purged. The pain becomes proof that the medicine is working. But let me tell you what's really happening in your neural pathways. You're experiencing what researchers call learned helplessness, a psychological state where you stop trying to escape negative situations because you've been conditioned to believe escape is impossible. Every argument you lose, not because you're wrong, but because the framework itself is rigged against you. Every apology that's never quite enough. Every attempt at reasoning that gets shut down with, "You just don't understand because you're a man." Your brain is literally rewiring itself to accept defeat as the natural state. Is this the partnership you signed up for? Is this the love that was supposed to elevate you? And that's when reality hits. It's 2 a.m. You're lying awake next to someone who sees you as a project to be fixed, not a person to be loved. The ceiling stares back at you, indifferent to your crisis. You realize you haven't really laughed in months. Your friends are gone. Your family walks on eggshells around her. You've become a stranger to yourself, performing a version of masculinity so sanitized, so apologetic, so diminished that you don't recognize the man in the mirror. The silence is deafening. Your thoughts race but go nowhere. You want to leave, but leaving means admitting failure. Staying means slow dissolution. You're trapped between two deaths, the quick death of ending it and facing the fallout, or the slow death of staying and watching yourself disappear one concession at a time. Your heart pounds. Your chest tightens. This isn't love. This isn't growth. This is psychological warfare, where you're both the battlefield and the casualty. She sleeps peacefully beside you, certain in her righteousness. But you? You're wide awake in a prison built from good intentions and bad ideology. The woman who promised to love you for who you are has spent every day since trying to fundamentally change who you are. And the worst part? You let her. You held the hammer while she pointed where to nail. This isn't about romance. It's about wiring how extremist ideologies hijack intimate relationships and turn love into a re-education program where you're always the student and never graduate. The cold truth is that radical ideology of any kind, left, right, religious, secular, cannot coexist with genuine intimacy because ideology demands conformity, while love demands acceptance. When someone sees you not as a complex human being, but as a representative of everything wrong with society, you're not in a relationship. You're in a reform program where the curriculum is your destruction. Here's what no one tells you about dating someone possessed by radical ideology. She didn't fall in love with you. She fell in love with the idea of fixing you, of being the one who finally tamed the patriarchy, one man at a time. But people aren't projects. Men aren't rehabilitation centers for someone else's trauma with masculinity. And real love doesn't require you to apologize for your existence. The patterns are predictable once you know what to look for. The love bombing followed by ideological testing. The isolation disguised as boundaries. The constant moving of goalposts, where nothing you do is ever pure enough, aware enough, feminist enough. You become addicted to the rare moments of approval, not realizing you're being trained like a circus animal, except the tricks get more degrading and the treats get smaller. Many men in these dynamics report the same thing, a complete loss of identity. You start strong, confident, sure of yourself. Within months, you're second-guessing every thought, filtering every word, apologizing for things you haven't done wrong. Your natural masculine energy, your drive, your protectiveness, your assertiveness gets pathologized as toxic. Meanwhile, her anger is righteous, her manipulation is boundary setting, her emotional volatility is passion. Do you see the double standard? In her worldview, your emotions are always political, but hers are always valid. The recovery from these relationships often takes years, not because of heartbreak heals, but because you have to rebuild your entire sense of self from scratch. You have to unlearn the shame that was programmed into you. You have to remember that your masculinity isn't toxic. It was just inconvenient to her ideology. You have to rediscover what you actually believe versus what you were conditioned to parrot. Most importantly, you have to forgive yourself for participating in your own diminishment. But here's where the real growth happens. When you understand that this experience, as painful as it was, taught you the most valuable lesson of your life: boundaries. Not her version of boundaries, which were really just control mechanisms. Real boundaries. The kind that says, I will not apologize for who I am. I will not shrink myself to fit someone else's ideology. I will not accept love that comes with conditions of constant reform. You learn to recognize the red flags early. The subtle tests disguised as casual conversations. The probing questions about your views on gender, power, privilege, not out of curiosity, but as interrogation. The way she lights up when you confess a problematic thought, like she's found another tumor to remove. The relationship isn't a partnership. It's a constant performance where you're always auditioning for basic human affection and always falling short. The damage these dynamics do to men is rarely discussed. Society doesn't have much sympathy for men who've been psychologically dismantled by radical partners. You're supposed to be strong enough to handle it, smart enough to see through it, man enough to either fix it or leave. But psychological manipulation doesn't care about your gender. Ideological possession doesn't check your privilege before it colonizes your mind. And the isolation that comes from being in a relationship where you're constantly wrong, constantly learning, constantly failing, that isolation is universal. What's particularly insidious is how these relationships exploit genuine male desires for growth and partnership. You want to be better. You want to understand. You want to support her causes, fight alongside her, be the kind of man who gets it. These are admirable impulses, and that's exactly why they're so easily weaponized. Your desire to be good becomes the very tool used to convince you that you're bad. Your openness to learning becomes the doorway through which ideology enters and takes over. The social dynamics make escape even harder. Her friends reinforce the narrative. Your friends, the few you have left, don't understand what you're going through. Try explaining to another man that your girlfriend's feminism is destroying you. Watch how quickly you're labeled as fragile, toxic, or unable to handle a strong woman. The very ideology that's dismantling you has also removed your ability to seek help, because seeking help means admitting that you, the privileged one, the oppressor, are somehow the victim. And victims are her territory, not yours. This is the special kind of gaslight that radical ideology brings to relationships. It's not just, that didn't happen. It's, that did happen, but here's why you deserved it. And here's why your pain about it is actually just your privilege showing. Your suffering gets reframed as growth. Your resistance gets reframed as toxicity. Your exhaustion gets reframed as the natural consequence of having to finally face the harm you've been causing just by existing as a man. The breaking point comes differently for every man. For some, it's the moment she attacks him for something his gender did centuries ago. For others, it's when she dismisses his childhood trauma because women have it worse. For many, it's simply the accumulation of small deaths, every joke that dies in his throat, every opinion he swallows, every part of himself he sacrificed on the altar of her ideology. The relationship becomes a museum of everything you used to be, with her as the curator explaining to visitors why each piece had to be removed. But here's what I want you to understand if you're in this situation or recovering from it. You are not crazy. Your feelings are not fragility. Your exhaustion is not weakness. You've been in a psychological war zone where the enemy was dressed as love, where every ceasefire was temporary, where peace was always conditional on your surrender. The fact that you survived, that you're seeking understanding, that you're trying to make sense of what happened, that's not privilege. That's courage. The path forward isn't about becoming anti-feminist or bitter toward women. That's just replacing one ideology with another. The path forward is about integration, taking the genuine lessons about equality and respect while rejecting the extremism that turns relationships into battlegrounds. It's about finding partners who see you as a human being first, not a representative of historical oppression. It's about relationships where growth is mutual, where challenge comes with compassion, where your masculinity is celebrated in its healthy forms, not pathologized in all forms. You'll know you're healing when you can disagree without apologizing, when you can express a feeling without first checking if it's politically correct, when you can exist in your full masculine energy without constantly monitoring yourself for signs of toxicity, when you can be strong without being called oppressive, without being called passive, king can being called dad, protective without being called controlling, ambitious without being called patriarchal. This isn't about returning to some imaginary past where men ruled unchecked. It's about finding a present where you can be fully human without ideological supervision. The ultimate irony is that many of these radical partners are themselves victims of the ideology they serve. They've been convinced that their unhappiness is your fault, that their struggles are your responsibility, that their healing requires your confession. They're as trapped as you are, maybe more so, because while you can eventually leave and rebuild, they remain imprisoned in a worldview that makes every relationship a battlefield and every man an enemy to be reformed or rejected. This brings us to the deeper truth about why you should never get involved with someone possessed by radical ideology, feminist or otherwise. It's not because their causes are wrong. Many of their causes are noble. It's because ideology, when it becomes identity, leaves no room for love. Real love requires seeing the person in front of you, not the symbol you've made them into. It requires grace for imperfection, space for growth, and the humility to admit that maybe, just maybe, your worldview isn't the complete truth. When you date a radical ideologue, you're not dating a person. You're dating a belief system that happens to have a body. Every interaction gets filtered through doctrine. Every conflict gets escalated to cosmic significance. Every difference becomes evidence of deep moral failing. You can't just leave the toilet seat up. You're perpetuating patriarchal dominance. You can't just forget an anniversary. You're demonstrating how society devalues women's emotions. You can't just be tired after work. You're exhibiting male privilege by expecting emotional labor. The exhaustion isn't just emotional, it's existential. You're constantly defending not just your actions, but your right to exist as you are. You're perpetually on trial for crimes you didn't commit, in a court where the law changes daily, and the judge has already decided you're guilty. The prosecution presents your entire gender's history as evidence against you personally. The defense you isn't allowed to mention your individual character, your personal growth, or your genuine efforts at understanding. The verdict is always the same: guilty, but we'll suspend the sentence if you submit to indefinite re-education. What makes this particularly damaging is that it exploits the best parts of masculinity, the desire to protect, to provide, to solve problems. You see her pain, her anger at injustice, her frustration with inequality, and your instinct is to help, to be part of the solution. But in radical ideology, you can never be part of the solution because you are, by definition, the problem. Your attempts to help are mansplaining. Your efforts to understand are centering yourself. Your desire to protect is patronizing. Every masculine instinct gets turned against you until you learn to suppress them all. The recovery requires understanding that you were in an abusive dynamic, even if no hand was ever raised, no voice ever elevated. Psychological abuse doesn't leave bruises you can photograph, but it leaves scars just as real. The constant criticism disguised as education, the moving goalposts disguised as growth, the isolation disguised as boundaries, the control disguised as accountability. These are abuse tactics, whether they come wrapped in radical feminism, religious extremism, or any other ideological package. Many men struggle to even call it abuse, because they've been conditioned to believe that men can't be victims, especially not victims of women. Especially not victims of women who position themselves as fighting against oppression. But oppression isn't fixed by creating new oppressors. Inequality isn't solved by reversing the hierarchy. And relationships built on ideological dominance are abusive, regardless of which gender holds the ideological high ground. The healing begins when you stop trying to win an unwinnable game. When you realize that no amount of self-flagellation will ever make you pure enough for someone who sees your existence as problematic, when you understand that love doesn't require you to hate yourself, and growth doesn't require you to erase yourself, When you finally accept that you deserve a partner who sees you as a human being, not a rehabilitation project. This is why the most important boundary you can set is ideological. Not because you should avoid people with strong beliefs, but because you should avoid people whose beliefs leave no room for your humanity. Whether it's radical feminism, radical religion, radical politics, when someone's ideology becomes more important than your well-being, you're not in a relationship. You're in a conversion therapy where the goal is to cure you of being yourself. The men who've survived these relationships often report a strange gratitude eventually, not for the pain, but for the clarity it brought. They learned the difference between accountability and shame, between growth and self-erasure, between a partner and a prosecutor. They discovered their own boundaries, their own values, their own non-negotiable sense of self. They emerged knowing exactly what they will and won't accept in the name of love. And perhaps most importantly, they learned that genuine equality doesn't require anyone's diminishment. That real feminism, the kind that seeks genuine equality and justice, doesn't need to destroy masculinity, but to partner with it. That healthy relationships involve two whole people growing together, not one person breaking the other down and rebuilding them according to ideological specifications. The truth is, she didn't leave you. She left the version of herself you reflected, the version that couldn't maintain the ideology, while experiencing genuine love. Because love and extremism cannot coexist, one always devours the other. And when extremism wins, what's left isn't a relationship. It's a battlefield where every interaction becomes a test of ideological purity, where love is conditional on your willingness to accept your fundamental wrongness. The recovery from these relationships follows a predictable pattern. First comes the confusion, the mental fog that descends when you've spent months or years having your reality constantly questioned. You find yourself second-guessing everything. Was that comment really sexist? Was that boundary really controlling? Was your need for emotional safety really just fragility? The gaslighting doesn't end when the relationship does. It echoes in your mind long after she's gone. Then comes the anger. Not the toxic kind she accused you of, but the healthy kind. The kind that says, this was not okay. The kind that recognizes abuse for what it was, regardless of what ideology it wrapped itself in. This anger is important. It's your psyche's way of reclaiming its right to exist, to have needs, to have boundaries, to be human without apology. But here's where many men get stuck. They swing from one extreme to another, from accepting all blame to accepting none. They go from all masculinity is toxic to all feminism is toxic. They replace one ideology with another, one extreme with its opposite. And in doing so, they miss the lesson entirely. The real lesson isn't that feminism is bad or that strong women are dangerous. The real lesson is that extremism in any form corrupts everything it touches, including legitimate causes. The lesson is that anyone who needs you to be less so, they can be more, isn't seeking equality, they're seeking dominance with better PR. I've watched men emerge from these relationships and make the mistake of closing themselves off entirely. They build walls where they need boundaries. They confuse self-protection with isolation. They meet genuinely feminist women who believe in equality without needing enemies, who can critique systems without destroying individuals, and they run. The trauma response kicks in the moment they hear certain words, certain concepts, and they're gone before they can discover that not everyone who believes in women's rights believes men are wrong. This is the secondary tragedy of radical ideological relationships. They can poison you against legitimate, healthy versions of the very things that were weaponized against you. You might find yourself unable to engage with important conversations about gender, equality, and justice, because those conversations have become triggering. You might find yourself dismissing real issues because fake ones were used to manipulate you. The healing requires something more nuanced than simple avoidance. It requires learning to differentiate between someone who challenges you to grow and someone who challenges your right to exist, between someone who calls you in and someone who calls you out, between accountability and attack. Here's what healthy challenge looks like in a relationship. Your partner points out a blind spot with compassion. They assume good intent while addressing impact. They create space for you to be imperfect without being evil. They acknowledge their own growth edges while pointing out yours. They celebrate your progress instead of moving the goalposts. They see your humanity even in your mistakes. Here's what ideological manipulation looks like. Every mistake is evidence of systemic oppression. Every disagreement is proof of your privilege. Every boundary is an act of violence. Every need is a manifestation of entitlement. Every emotion except guilt is toxic. Every step forward is too little, too late. The men who heal from these relationships really heal, not just build higher walls, do something remarkable. They reclaim their right to be complex. They accept that they can be both flawed and good, both growing and worthy, both masculine and healthy. They stop trying to earn their humanity through ideological compliance and start claiming it as their birthright. They also develop a kind of radar for extremism that serves them well in all areas of life. They can spot the person whose politics, religion, or philosophy has become more important than people. They recognize the red flags, the black and white thinking, the moving goalposts, the constant state of emergency, the dehumanization of the other, the inability to acknowledge nuance or exception. And yes, they learn to spot the difference between radical feminism and actual feminism. They learn that real feminists don't need men to be broken to feel whole, that genuine equality seekers don't require submission but partnership, that healthy advocates for women's rights can also advocate for men's humanity. But perhaps the most important thing they learn is this: you cannot love someone out of their extremism. You cannot be good enough, supportive enough, submissive enough to make them see your humanity if their ideology has already classified you as the enemy. The only winning move is not to play. This doesn't mean avoiding strong, passionate, principled women. Some of the best relationships involve women with fierce convictions about justice and equality. The difference is that these women's convictions include space for your full humanity. Their feminism lifts everyone up rather than tearing certain people down. Their strength doesn't require your weakness. If you're in one of these relationships right now, listening to this and recognizing the patterns, know this: the shame you feel isn't yours. The guilt that seems endless isn't justified. The sense that you're never good enough isn't accurate. It's the point. The system is designed to keep you perpetually failing, perpetually apologizing, perpetually trying to earn what should be freely given: basic respect and human dignity. And if you've recently left one of these relationships, know this: the confusion will clear, the self-doubt will fade, the ability to trust your own perceptions will return. But it takes time, and it takes conscious effort to deprogram yourself from the ideological conditioning you've undergone. Seek therapy if you can, specifically someone who understands ideological abuse and won't simply continue the pattern of making everything your fault. Read about emotional abuse, gaslighting, and manipulation. Connect with others who've had similar experiences. Most importantly, start small in reclaiming your right to have opinions, needs, boundaries, and feelings without extensive justification. The journey back to yourself after one of these relationships is not about becoming anti-feminist or anti-woman. It's about becoming pro-human, including your own humanity. It's about recognizing that any ideology that requires the dehumanization of any group, even if that group has historical advantages, is toxic and corrupting. It's about understanding that true justice doesn't require new oppression, just the end of all oppression. So why should you never get involved with a radical feminist? Not because feminism is wrong, not because strong women are dangerous, not because traditional gender roles are better, but because extremism of any kind makes genuine love impossible. Because any relationship that requires you to accept your fundamental wrongness as the price of admission is not a relationship. It's a hostage situation with better vocabulary. The men who've walked this path want you to know you deserve a love that sees all of you, your flaws and your virtues, your growth edges and your strengths, your masculinity and your humanity. You deserve a partner who challenges you to grow without challenging your right to exist. You deserve someone whose love isn't conditional on your willingness to disappear. And perhaps most importantly, you deserve to know that walking away from someone who can only love you if you hate yourself isn't giving up. It's growing up. It's choosing reality over ideology, health over extremism, and genuine equality over performative submission. Your humanity is not negotiable. Your worth is not dependent on ideological compliance, and your love should never require your erasure. Remember, in healthy relationships, both people get to be fully human. Anything less isn't love, it's politics. And you deserve better than being someone's ideological project. You deserve to be someone's partner.